Hey, everybody, we're back. I'm your host, Marlon Gardenera. You're listening to the Divided States of America show. Last Friday, I told you it was too nice a Friday to get on air and talk about horrible divisive issues. This Friday is not so bad. There's an update to the CDC recommendations. There's obviously an update to the latest on the documents found at Mar-a-Lago. We'll cover those quickly and then send you off to create your joy stories over the weekend. But first, let's get started.
Welcome to the Divided States of America show, where your host, Marlon Gardenera, takes on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We'll sort through the best and worst of politics and culture, asking questions and looking for answers that our two-ring, two-party circus has failed to provide. And here is your host, Marlon Gardenera.
Preparing for it. Hopefully you find a way to find joy, spend time with family, friends. Maybe you just do nothing. Sit at home and relax. Take a load off. I know a good portion of this country is very, very hot. Hopefully you're able to stay cool. If you don't have AC where you are, hopefully you're able to get to a location that does. Find joy. I'm going to say it over and over and over again. And it'd be nice if one day we thought the whole nation was finding joy, or at least we were even looking for it. Sometimes you have to question that. Anyway, today is going to be quick. It is beautiful. I'm in Southern California. It's 90 degrees, a little too warm where I'm at. The beach is probably in the low 80s. Perfect, but don't have time to do that today. I do have time to talk to you, and I appreciate all of the feedback that I have been receiving. I can tell you, again, the feedback on our question about whether Trump's appeal was white supremacy was, as I expected, everywhere. Lots of thoughts, lots of comments, lots of anger, lots of frustrations. We know, remember, when we talk about divisive issues, it probably doesn't get as divisive as Donald Trump. That's probably as big and loud as we can make it. People have very, very strong feelings about him one way or the other, and they will let you know. Unfortunately, we're so divided on that alone, it's kind of scary. But quite a few people took the time to share their comments with us about that question. Stacy Glad, just stop with the BS. Liberal dividers just never stop, do you? So tired of it. DeSantis for POTUS, get rid of the one world order creeps. Here's a question I have. Each one of you has to know, and this is each person who's a conservative Republican, maybe a Trump supporter, in this case, a DeSantis supporter. You have to know a Democrat that you like. You have to know that generalizing an entire group of people that way is wrong. It's just wrong. Likewise, you can't just disregard all Republicans. You can. You're free to do whatever you want. But the silliness of it, the short-sightedness of it, the not understanding how this country has come to the place it's at, and the steps and the process and the good things that came from both parties. I'm an advocate of going in a different direction, having a third party, having to actually compromise, having to work together. But it's amazing where we're at. Anyway, Robert Whitmore, let's knock off the white supremacy BS. We had a lot of progress on discrimination. Whites are now a minority. Now the so-called anti-racist folks are doing the dividing. I know there are a lot of people that think just talking about race is divisive. I would say to those people, while it still exists, not talking about it is not going to make it go away. And quite frankly, for the people who want to fight against racism, they don't care what racists think about that discussion. Racists aren't going to all of a sudden wake up and say, hey, let's be fair. So the people who are against it are going to continue to fight. And those who are on the fringe and say, stop talking about it, that's what's divisive. Do you not talk about a raise at work? Do you just hope you get one? Do you not talk about in your relationships or with your children the things that you find important and want to see improve or change? Do you just sort of let it play itself out and see how it goes? Don't ask people on the other side of racism to be quiet. That's silly. Don't automatically assume the fact that someone is having that discussion and automatically think they're trying to divide us. No, they're actually trying to unite us. They're trying to get people on the other side to treat everyone fairly. When everyone is treated fairly, I don't know what they're going to argue about. but people have very, very strong opinions. The best place to see that, facebook.com/thedsa-show.com. I'll be in there this weekend. I'll be commenting. I'll be responding to people's comments in there. And there are quite a few of them. Facebook.com/thedsa-show. I appreciate people taking the time to do that. Today, another divisive issue. And again, I think it really, many of the things divide on party lines. Many of the things do divide on race. Some are coincidental. Some, it's just the culture of America. And let's not mistake, America has a culture. And there are people who are outliers and they're not mainstream in that culture. But within the mainstream culture, I always assume most people are good. They really are. And then on the extremes or the further end of the spectrum, in each case, you've got people who are more interesting, stronger opinions, don't necessarily care about what other people think. They think America should go in one particular direction. They look down upon the people who don't agree with them. So it can be bad. It can be bad. We see that, but I don't think anywhere have we seen it quite as clearly as the pandemic. COVID was here. It was real. I don't know if there are still COVID deniers out there. No sense in trying to educate or communicate with them. The information is out there. You don't need me. If you're interested in finding out the truth, people have plenty of venues that they could go look. What I would talk about here is what you would expect me to talk about on a regular basis. There was such a divide as it related to COVID that we didn't make the progress we should have as a nation. More people died than necessary. At the same time, more people lost their homes and their businesses and their livelihood than was necessary as well. The expectation that we had a leader who was guiding us through it, let's be honest, we didn't necessarily have that. Trump took a different approach. That was his prerogative. He seemingly left it to the states. So then we had 50 different responses, and the 50 different responses in each state was reflective, unfortunately, of the politics of that state. Some states did better, some did worse. Some economies did better, some school systems did worse. The results were a reflection of how we were led through it. They were a result, to me, of the divide because there was no cohesive plan. So again, more people died than was necessary. More people lost their homes as well. Again, their businesses, their livelihood, companies they've been running for 40 years. So both sides failed to address the issue. There was no national leadership. There was nothing that unified us against a common threat. The common threat was the pandemic, COVID. Instead, we made the common threat each other. We really did. We made it about each other, not about Americans fighting the pandemic, not about America coming out better than the other countries in the world. We used to have that competitive juice, that fire, that what can we do to stay strong? What can we do to be better than other places? Don't kid yourself. Americans take pride in being better. We do. We don't have a problem with trying to be better than other people. That's the part of the American culture. And we've succeeded in many ways. We didn't succeed as it related to COVID. I know the deaths, the number of people in hospitals. I definitely wouldn't say we were a third world country, but we definitely were not a leader as it related to COVID. And I blame it again on both sides. Our response to it was heavy-handed in both directions. Heavy-handed in everything's got to stop. We don't have real solutions, but we think this is the best way. And then the other side saying it doesn't matter. Or, one of the worst things I remember hearing is, the people who are dying are old. I'm sorry, have you written off old people? Did any one of you volunteer your family members that were old and say, hey, look, if we got to get rid of some old people, let it be my family? I'm guessing most people didn't actually do that. They would say it's just old people. Everybody else is fine. Don't worry about us. Did you just not have concern about older folks? Which brings me back to this. We didn't handle COVID well. Both sides failed the American people. There was a lack of national leadership that united us, unified us against a common enemy. And many times, sometimes, war does it where Americans get behind each other. Sure, there are protests. Sure, there are disagreements. But for the most part, our culture gets together and goes. That culture didn't exist for COVID. So the damage that was done for both political sides was clear. Again, I'd love a third party. Maybe a third party could have been a little bit more rational and took the edge off either one of the two sides and how they went about dealing with COVID. People have strong opinions about COVID. I've been doing a little studying about culture. I've been doing a little study about the psychology of culture, the differences between Americans and other places, not because I want to take on the system of any other place. I don't. I can't think of another country or system that I look at and go, boy, I really wish we were doing that here in America. I know there are some places where they think they're happier and their motivation, their culture is different. So, how they measure success is different. In America, a lot of times we measure success individually. We talk about the freedoms, but we measure success a lot of times purely based on that individualism. And while that has served us in many respects, the individualism of COVID did not serve us well for anybody. I have friends who have such strong feelings. It's just shocking. And I'm sure they're shocked at me. I respect the difference, the fact that they can feel differently. But one thing I think we learned from COVID is, and this is a reflection of America. Because we weren't united, we failed. We got through it. We got the vaccine. You got to give Trump administration credit for pushing through whatever they needed to push through to get it there. The federal government provided a ton of money, which always makes me think, the pharmaceuticals, they say they have to charge so much money because to do the research and development. And then I remember America will step up and help with that when American citizens are at risk. The government will do that. And people often don't talk necessarily about that. They talk about how they hate the government, and the government's heavy-handed, but when the government actually solves problems, we don't necessarily acknowledge it. Having said that, the government stepped up. The Trump administration stepped up. They plowed through and got vaccinations in people's hands. But then, even then, it was really the political divide that determined who got vaccinated and who didn't. And in the beginning, when the vaccination for one variant was intended to try to keep you from getting COVID, and then the reality with the changes in the variants became the vaccination only kept you from dying, or it did a much better job of that. You had people complaining, well, it doesn't stop you from getting COVID, so it's useless. I think dying is something to try to prevent. I mean, we have stop signs and speed limits, and while we break them, people with total disregard tend to die at a higher level than the people with more regard for it. Having said that, it said so much about America, but what it said most clearly was that it went down the same divide as most things, political, cultural. So we failed. We failed the people that are dead that we could have saved. We failed the people who lost homes and businesses because of the heavy-handed response on the other side. National leadership, a unified approach to looking out for the best interest of as many people as possible and figuring out practical ways to accomplish that would have been better. We gave billions and billions and billions in welfare to businesses. We certainly complain about billions of welfare to the mentally impaired, to the people who receive poor educations. It's amazing when Americans will accept money and then say we shouldn't give it. Republicans took money during the pandemic. They took the PPP loans. They took the loans that were forgiven. They took the incredibly low interest rate loans. And I'm not saying they didn't have a right to. Those same people, though, will have short-term memory and then go against every federal dollar for anybody that isn't them because they don't particularly need it. We've always given money to our farmers. But COVID reminded us that more people needed help. And we didn't have the best response, and we didn't have a coordinated response, and we didn't handle it as Americans. We handled it almost by party line. Really. Whoever runs your state dictated how your state handled it. And you had states who, schools were open the whole time. But their outcomes, their test scores, their rankings are still horrible. So don't get me wrong, kids needed to be in school. But we just weren't working together to look for a clear solution. Having said all that, we're moving on, and we're at a place where the CDC is finally taking a different approach. I think we all understand if you get the vaccination, you improve your odds of living, not going to the ICU and living. And there are people who've made the decision it's not going to affect them in that way. They're not getting the vaccination. Fine. If those people had a method of not dying, I would feel bad at the loss of life, but also the ignorance that led to it. I am vaccinated, I am boosted, but I'm in a unique situation. I have pre-existing conditions. But we know where we are with the vaccination. It does not stop you from getting it, but it does improve the odds of you surviving it. A significant number of the population has received at least one shot, in many cases the second, and many are boosted. Kids, the single digits for kids under 5 getting vaccinations. And the logic and the concern has always been kids don't die from it. And yes, some have. And there have been unique circumstances that have led to that. But for the most part, they don't. So parents aren't sticking that extra needle in their kids' arms if they don't feel the risk is greater than the reward of giving them the vaccine. Older kids, I believe it's in the 20s and 30%. It's a low number. But again, people aren't feeling the impact of it on their children. They're making personal decisions about their children. And I understand people making personal decisions across the board. I don't want to get the vaccine. No problem. If you work for a company where they require it, go work for someone else. The company's not required to cater to you and your personal needs. If they have a business and they have a model and they think they need to take these steps to take care of their people, they can, obviously, as long as it's not discriminating. I've certainly seen people use fake religious exemptions. I guess people use what they have to use. But the morals of America were not to be united and fight through this. The morals of using religion when you don't actually believe it, another subject. But, America's integrity, that's easy to pick apart. We stand for some things, but sort of, sometimes, not always. It's pliable. It can be bent in one direction or the other. Let's not kid ourselves. We bend. We try not to break, but we bend. But it's just a reflection of American culture. The standards in which people want us to maintain, they bend, they change. It depends on if it's impacting me or not. Me. Having said that, again, the CDC has changed the regulations. They say they're in a stronger place today as a nation with more tools like vaccinations, boosters, treatments to protect ourselves and our communities from severe illness from COVID, said Greta Mazzetti, the PhD and public health, master's in public health expert, the person running the CDC. People don't trust the CDC as if they have their own set of scientists looking out for their best interest. Certainly doctors have contradictory opinions. The CDC could be late. They could be, I could go as far as saying misleading. I always think they're using the information they have. And you wonder how we have the impression of a different set of facts than the ones they give us. And when they contradict, it seems like it takes a little while to clear it up. Fauci, credible to some, not credible to others. Again, there was no united front against a common enemy. It seemed as if the enemy was the pandemic and each other. As if the pandemic wasn't bad enough. We lost 1 million lives in America. As if the pandemic wasn't enough. We lost 1 million lives. Relate that to war and how many people we lose in wars. We unite better for a war against a common enemy, someone we can hate, than we do a pandemic, which certainly didn't have any love for us. It took 1 million lives in America. We failed. Anyway, the CDC is trying to update what's going on. They want to continually promote the importance of up-to-date vaccinations to protect people against serious illness, hospitalization, and death. They want to update that. They want people to stay on top of it. They are going to work to create more vaccinations as the variants change. They're recommending that instead of quarantining when you're exposed to COVID-19, you wear a high-quality mask for 10 days and get tested after 5. They're no longer saying if you're exposed to COVID, shut down, lock yourself down, stay away from things. I think the biggest impact there was schools. Kids aren't in school. The impact of kids not in school is huge. Socially, culturally, environment. I mean, every aspect that you can think of for a child, that norm is important. That education, that transfer of information, that focus, obviously the socialization in many cases, incredibly important. And they've decided that the risk that you take by not isolating when you know someone is exposed is not as great. They're transitioning to let's keep people alive, not how are we going to stop this from spreading. There's never been a time we've ever been able to stop this from spreading. And the best hope and effort that we could have made is test everybody early on, frequently. And if you have to shut things down, shut it down for a shorter period of time, test everyone. So we have essentially an accounting of everybody who has COVID, or at least as close to one as possible. So those people can isolate so we could get through that phase. We never had enough tests. We never did what was necessary to even identify who had COVID. We didn't do basic things. We failed. We weren't united in that war. Oftentimes, if we need enough weapons for war, we will make it happen. Enough COVID tests so that we could find out where America was and do a better job of preventing the spread of it. We failed. Yeah, there's people that didn't want to get tested for COVID. I get it. There were so many examples of individualism and me, and I don't care about anyone else, which is also a part of our culture. And then there were so many people that were just selfless. I think of doctors and nurses. I had COVID in July. I managed to get away with it for 2 years. It was significantly important to me because the risk of dying was greater because I have pre-existing conditions. I'm one of those people. I remember going in to get treatment, and there were 2 nurses that were always there and 1 tech. And I just said it. Do you get more money to be in this room with people you know have COVID and to treat them? Do they rotate you? Like if you just recently had COVID, so you have a higher immunity, they put you in this room? Or do they just let any nurse come in this room, even though, and obviously they have to be vaccinated and boosted in many of the medical facilities in the country, but do they just let anybody in here? You know, people that are at risk, more at risk? No, it's just part of our job. It's just what we do. So to contrast the selfishness of Americans saying, I don't care about other people. Their problems aren't my problems. You had the people who were willing to sacrifice everything and go to work every day, the first responders every day, who then had to risk their families when they went home. You had some Americans that showed that grit that we like to associate with being American. We don't always live it anymore, but we certainly try to associate with that identity. Anyway, again, we're moving to preventing severe illness and death, not trying to stop it from happening everywhere all the time. They're also recommending when you do have it, that you wear a high quality mask, you get tested, you test out of it. Instead of just saying my symptoms are gone, they want you to take 2 tests. When you think your symptoms are gone, take a test, take another test 48 hours later. The recommendations are everywhere. If after 5 days, you're fever-free, 24 hours, without the use of medication, and your symptoms are improving, and isolation at 5 days, they still say that, but they say put a mask on. If you ended up with a high fever and a lot of symptoms, they say quarantine for 10 days, if you get it. But what we're not doing is trying to stop everybody from getting it and all of the silliness that happened there. I'll just say this, America, we failed. We didn't take on that common enemy together. So people died that didn't need to. People lost homes and businesses. People were isolated and developed mental health issues that they'll never overcome. We failed. CDC is loosening up, taking on a different approach, different phase. I'll just say this. You may not trust the CDC, but why would anybody trust you on your medical advice? What qualifies you? And most Americans have to understand that your qualifications were just that you were self-interested. Again, lots of people made sacrifices. Again, lots of people took precautions. Again, lots of people felt guilt when they had COVID and fear that they may have given it to other people. I got to tell you, when I had COVID, I was scared. I was scared, will I make it because of my pre-existing conditions? But who else did I give it to? What impact did it have on them? Are they hurting other people? Is someone going to die down the chain of people who received it from me because good friends got it from me? I wasn't taking the appropriate precautions. I fall into the same selfish category. I'm not trying to make myself immune. This isn't a show where I'm pointing the fingers at you and saying you're terrible. What were you doing? What were you thinking? I was as human as you were. I'm just saying we failed. There was no national initiative. There was no team. I'm a coach. There was no team as we took on that common enemy. Take a look at the latest CDC guidelines. They're everywhere. CDC.org, cdc.org/COVID-19. You can see those changes. But no, the next time America has a common enemy, is there any chance we could have a common goal at the same time? Obviously, faith in that being the case. I'm not sure. I'm just not. It's pretty sad. All right, let's change gears. Trump, he's in the news. Never changes. Doesn't change. New York Times story. Black and white. Live updates. Many people don't care. I think this may be one of the few times where I'm just laying out an opinion. I'm laying it out for a reason. Because as we tackle this divide, we have to tackle the accountability necessary on both sides. I want to find instances of the extremes where it hurt the mainstream. We're going to do it here. We're going to do it here every day. All right. More Trump. Just the reality. More Trump. More Trump. I don't know how to say it. 11 sets of classified documents were taken from Mar-a-Lago in the raid the other day. The right thinks that they were politically motivated. They think that Biden was involved and he is weaponizing the FBI and the DOJ. They're able to dismiss that there potentially was an informant who communicated, hey, there's still documents here. The Trump administration has communicated that they were working seamlessly with investigators. They handed over documents. Obviously, that couldn't have been true if there's still some there. The level of classification went across the three spectrums, top secret being, I think, the highest, confidential being the lowest. The story will tell you where everything was in between. This one particular story came from the New York Times. Here's the reality about the divide in America. Here's the reality about that integrity situation we were talking about. And Democrats are not immune from this. Feel free to send the stories. The biggest act in town is Trump. That's why people focus on him. The biggest impact one could likely have on America would probably come from Trump. Most people aren't as impactful as he is. Look what he's done. Look what he's done. And again, if you go to facebook.com/the DSA show, you're going to see what people think of the answer that a young lady provided, where she said a lot of the support was related to white supremacy. People feel empowered. They feel important. They feel like someone's representing them. They feel like they're not being replaced. And that's the same thing that the KKK says at their rallies. Facebook.com/the DSA show. You can see that yourself. But Trump is an important figure. In this particular case, he had documents after they had been requested. He still had some. People say they weaponized the FBI, they weaponized the DOJ. It was unnecessary. My only question as we look at this divide, if you are a person who was saying lock Hillary up, I would understand if you're mad that they didn't raid her house and get her computer. That would be the corollary. If a crime was committed, we needed to have investigated. Why didn't they? I don't have answers to that, but I certainly know Trump had power when he first got in office, Congress, the House. They could have done anything they wanted. They could have referred it to his DOJ with his people in place. They didn't. If it was courtesy because of being in a high level or a position of authority within our government, then that's a failure because everybody should be held accountable. No one is above the law. If they should have gone after Hillary, they certainly had an opportunity. I don't know why they didn't. Of course, they're still bringing up Hillary now, even though they were in a position to change it. But my question would be, if you said lock her up because you thought she had something on her email server, and I believe they verified she did have some classified documents, are you now saying lock him up? Because the new spin we're hearing is that, he declassified the information. There was a rumor yesterday that some of it was about nuclear weapons. Do we really want him declassifying nuclear weapons so that he's allowed to keep it at Mar-a-Lago? Same place a Chinese dissident walked in, unsecure place. There were obviously security concerns there. Unless we're honest about the divide, we're not going to fix it. That applies to both parties. Unless we're more honest about the divide, it's not going to be fixed. We'll be worse off. We'll be more horrible to one another. We'll be less equipped to tackle big issues. We'll be less equipped to tackle common enemies. We won't be standing side by side. Again, oftentimes we do it in war, but pandemic, in terms of lives lost, was bigger than most of the wars we've had recently. I'll say it again. The pandemic was bigger than many of the wars we've had. I mean, you have to put it in perspective. You have to put it in perspective. We lost 58,000 people in Vietnam. We lost 1 million people to COVID. So it's not even a situation where we see the impact of something or we're more fearful than we might have otherwise been. So we step up and we do better. We didn't. We failed, both sides. I hate to do this on a Friday, but I can do it with this in mind. Be better. We're failing at a lot of things, and we point the finger at our politicians, but we never point the finger at ourselves. We don't have to take extreme views. We actually need to moderate so that we can work together for more people to benefit from the changes we'd like to see. If the changes you'd like to see only impact you, your side, your people, we'll continue to fail. It's really that simple. We're better than that. Listen, go be better. Go have a great weekend. Spend it with loved ones. If you have to work this weekend, I'm sorry. Hopefully you had some time off earlier in the week. If you're working multiple jobs, I commend you. You're doing your best to make the American dream possible for you and your family. Heck, if you're fighting to get into this country, if it's based on asylum, I hope you get the relief you need. If you have a credible case, if you don't, I hope you understand the sovereignty of this nation and you got to stay on the other side or whatever that imaginary line is. But no matter who you are or where you are, we have to be better. We have to be better. Go find joy. Put yourself in a position to talk about how we are better. And again, the average person goes to work, they take care of their family, they look for great moments. Be that. But America, be better. We don't have to be the divided states of America. We can actually live by our name, United States of America. Our goal is to have those thoughtful, respectful conversations. We do it here weekdays, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going to continue to tackle these issues. We'll have a relaunch of the show where it's not so much experimenting and trying to figure out the best way to do this, but when we put it out to lots of people so that we get more of you on air talking about these real issues. In any case, I have to thank the people who have taken the time to listen every day and the people who jump in when they can. You always can go to YouTube and find previous episodes of the show. You can do the same thing on Facebook or Twitter. My preference is that you go to YouTube, want to build an audience there, get access to some of the tools that make it possible for us to reach more people. But as we continue that pursuit, again, I thank you for the time you've spent. Find joy. America, be better. That's it for today. I appreciate you tuning in to the Divided States of America show.
Thanks for watching the Divided States of America show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel and share this video with your family and friends.